Please help my mommy. Those men are hurting her. The desperate cry tore through the rainy parking lot like a siren. A little boy, 7 years old, barefoot, eyes swollen with tears, ran across the concrete toward a cluster of leather-clad bikers polishing their motorcycles outside a bustling highway cafe. His small hands trembled as he pointed towards the eyrie behind him. The bikers froze, engines idled. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jackson Reed, lowered his helmet slowly. "Calm down, son," he said, crouching to meet the child's eyes. "Tell me what happened," the boy's voice cracked. "They're beating my mama inside." And that was how the longest day of Lena Washington's life began to change. Before we continue, please subscribe to Karen Tales, like this video, and let us know where you are watching us from in the comment below. Finally, make us a promise to share this video with your loved ones if you enjoy the story. Let's get started. Hours earlier, the morning had been peaceful. Inside Joe's roadside cafe, the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. Behind the counter, Lena, a 42-year-old crippled waitress, moved gracefully in her wheelchair, balancing trays with practiced precision. Her smile never faltered, even when the pain in her legs burned like fire. Her regulars adored her. "Lena is the heart of this place," they always said. And they were right. After her husband died 1 year earlier, Lena had taken the job to raise her son, Tommy Ramirez. Her honesty and dedication soon caught the eye of the cafe's owner, Elena Foster, a kind-hearted woman who trusted Lena more than anyone else. 6 months before leaving town for a year-long project, Elena had called Lena into her office. "Lena," she said warmly, "I'm putting you in charge while I'm gone. You've earned it. Keep this place running just like you always do." Lena wept that day, not out of pride, but gratitude. For the first time in years, someone believed in her, but not everyone shared kindness. Across the street, a group of thugs had noticed the cafe's new head. They were the kind of men who preyed on fear. Carlos, Mike, and Derek, loud, drunk, and arrogant. When they learned the real owner had left town, they saw an easy target. Every evening, they swaggered into the cafe, demanding free food. "Keep it coming, cripple," Carlos would sneer, slamming his fist on the table. Lena would nod politely, her heart pounding, and serve them without charge. She remembered too clearly what cruelty could do. As a child, school bullies had pushed her down a staircase, crushing her knees and stealing her ability to walk. That memory lived in her bones, whispering that standing up could cost more than silence ever would. That Tuesday afternoon, the cafe was unusually busy. Lena and Tommy had sold every last plate by closing time. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and golden, as Tommy hummed while wiping tables. Then the door creaked open and her stomach dropped. The thugs were back. "Evening, sweetheart." Carlos grinned, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. "Hope you saved our table," Lena forced a calm smile. "I'm sorry, gentlemen. We're closed and all the food is gone." "Gone?" Mike mocked, slamming his hand on the counter. "Maybe you forgot who keeps you safe around here." "I don't want any trouble," she whispered. Derek leaned against the wall, smirking. "Then you should have saved us something." Lena's voice trembled. "Please come back tomorrow. I'll make sure." Before she could finish, Carlos struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the empty cafe like lightning. Tommy screamed, "Stop! Leave my mama alone!" Lena's wheelchair tipped backward as she fell. Trays clattered, glass shattered. The men laughed while Tommy knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Run, Tommy!" she cried through her tears. "Go get help!" Tommy bolted through the door, his tiny legs pumping, his voice echoing through the parking lot. "Please help my mommy. Those men are hurting her." The bikers outside looked up in shock. Jackson Reed stood first, his jaw tightening. "Bear Rider, let's go." Within seconds, their engines roared alive, filling the air with thunder. The roar of engines shook the air as the bikers stormed across the parking lot. Inside's roadside cafe, the laughter of the thugs died in their throats when the glass doors burst open. "Party's over," Jackson Reed said, his tone quiet but sharp enough to cut through fear. Carlos, Mike, and Derek spun around, startled by the sight of 3 broad-shouldered men in black leather vests filling the doorway. The golden light from outside silhouetted their forms like shadows of judgment. "Who the hell are you?" Carlos demanded, his voice cracking. "The guys who don't like bullies," Jackson replied. Bear and Hawk stepped beside him, silent, towering, ready. The tension inside that small cafe thickened until even the flies hovering near the lights seemed afraid to move. Jackson took a slow step forward. "You've got 5 seconds to leave this woman alone." No one moved. The only sound came from the faint whimper of Lena Washington, still trembling on the floor where her wheelchair lay overturned. Her son, Tommy Ramirez, clung to her arm, crying softly. When Carlos didn't respond, Jackson's patience snapped. In one swift motion, he seized the man by the collar and dragged him halfway across the counter. "You think hitting a woman makes you strong?" he growled. "Try me!" Carlos's voice broke. We didn't mean no harm. You did?" Jackson cut in coldly, shoving him backward. "Now get out!" The thug stumbled toward the door. Mike muttered a curse, but one glance from Bear silenced him. They fled into the fading light, tripping over each other in their hurry. When the sound of their footsteps faded, Jackson turned back to Lena. He crouched beside her, his tone softening. "You okay, ma'am?" Her voice shook. "They said they'd burn the cafe next time." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Not while we're around?" He lifted her wheelchair upright and helped her back into it. Tommy wrapped his arms around his mother's waist, still sobbing. "Thank you," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't know what to do." Jackson nodded slowly. "You did what you had to. You protected your boy." Bear walked over to the counter, shaking his head. "They messed this place up bad." Lena forced a faint smile. "It's nothing I can't fix." Jackson stood. "You won't fix it alone." Outside, the bikers pushed the door open, letting the evening air cool the tension that hung heavy inside. The sun was low now, painting the clouds orange and gold. Tommy stood by his mother's side, clutching her hand as though letting go might bring the danger back. Jackson lit a cigarette, though he didn't smoke it. He just let it burn between his fingers, eyes scanning the quiet street. "They'll come back," he said. "Guys like that always do when they think you're easy prey." Lena's lips trembled. "I've dealt with worse," he looked at her. Really looked at her. The strength in her words didn't match the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw pain there, but also something else. Pride. "You shouldn't have to deal with worse," he said. "This place is yours to protect, not theirs to destroy." She said nothing, only nodded. He flicked the cigarette aside. "Well, stay around tonight. Make sure nothing happens." Lena started to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. She simply whispered, "Thank you." That night, the cafe grew quiet. The open sign flickered dimly against the window while the bikers sat outside, leaning against their bikes under the neon glow. Inside, Lena wiped the counter, her movements slow and heavy. Tommy had fallen asleep in one of the booths, his small head resting on folded arms. She glanced through the window, watching Jackson and his men talking in low voices. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely helpless. Yet deep inside, fear still nodded at her. Fear of what might come next. Fear that she had drawn more trouble by being brave. She whispered a prayer beneath her breath. "Lord, please don't let them come back." Now, before we continue, let's talk about something you might not expect me to say. Strength isn't silence. You see, most people believe that being strong means enduring everything quietly, keeping your head down, holding your pain until it disappears. It's what society tells us. Good people don't fight back. But that belief is a lie because silence doesn't make you strong. It makes you invisible. And that's the mistake Lena had made for years. She believed enduring cruelty without speaking was noble. She thought keeping peace meant staying quiet. But sometimes silence feeds the very monsters that hurt you. Give me your full attention because soon you'll see exactly why that silence almost cost her everything. The clock ticked past midnight. Bear stretched, his leather vest creaking. "I'll grab more coffee," he muttered. As he stepped inside, Jackson followed, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. Lena looked up from the counter, startled but smiling weakly. "You should rest," Jackson said. "I can't," she replied softly. "If I stop, I'll start thinking," he nodded. "Fair enough. Thinking too much at night can be a curse." He glanced towards the window, then back at her. "Where's the owner of this place?" "Out of town for a year," Lena said. "She left me in charge." "That explains why those vultures came after you," he muttered. Lena sighed. "They've been coming for weeks. I just thought they'd stop if I didn't fight back." Jackson leaned on the counter. "That's what they count on. People being too afraid to say no." She looked at him, weary but curious. "Why do you care so much?" He shrugged. "Maybe because once someone helped me when I couldn't fight back." Their eyes met in quiet understanding. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass shattered the calm. Lena gasped. "What was that?" Jackson spun toward the door. A rock rolled across the floor, landing near the counter. Attached to it was a small note scrolled in messy handwriting. "This ain't over. Next time we burn it down. Tommy stirred in his sleep as Lena clutched her chest. Her voice trembled. They're not finished. Jackson picked up the note, his expression darkening. No, he said quietly. They're just stupid enough to come back. Bear stepped up beside him, cracking his knuckles. Then we'll be waiting. Outside, the night seemed to hold its breath. The faint hum of motorcycles idled low and steady like thunder waiting to roll. Lena looked out through the cracked window at the dark street beyond. Fear mixed with something new. Determination. She whispered almost to herself. Maybe silence isn't strength after all? Jackson heard her and gave a small nod. No, ma'am, it's not. The engines growled once more, echoing through the empty street as the first drops of rain began to fall, soft, slow, and full of warning. The night wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The night bled into morning quietly. Rain had come and gone, washing the streets clean, but leaving behind the smell of wet asphalt and burnt coffee from the cafe's broken pot. Lena sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug, staring out at the empty parking lot. The events of the night replayed in her mind. Carlos's slap, Tommy's cry, the roar of the motorcycles, and a sharp glint of anger in Jackson Reed's eyes when he read the thug's note. The words still echoed in her head. Next time we burn it down. Tommy sat beside her, still in his pajamas, drawing on a napkin with one of the calf's pens. Every few minutes he glanced up at his mother, worry etched into his tiny face. Mama, he said softly. Are those bad men coming back? Lena smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. Not today, baby. Mr. Jackson's still outside. Remember? Tommy turned to look through the window. Sure enough, Jackson and two of his crew were sitting on the curb, helmets beside them, eyes sharp and watchful. Their presence gave the place a strange kind of safety. Rough, loud, but somehow protective. Lena sighed. I don't even know why they're helping us. They don't owe me anything. Tommy grinned. Because they're good people, Mama. She looked at him, eyes tired. Maybe. But deep down she wasn't sure she believed that yet. As the morning crowd began to trickle in, Lena forced herself to focus on work. She cleaned up broken glass, righted chairs, and reopened the cash register. Life had to move on, even after fear tried to freeze it. When she rolled past the window, Jackson knocked lightly on the glass. You okay in there? She nodded, trying to be. He pushed the door open, wiping rain from his arms. Bear and Hawk are grabbing breakfast across the street. I'll stay close. You shouldn't be alone right now. Lena looked up at him. You don't need to do all this, you know. Jackson shrugged. We all got our reasons, ma'am. Sometimes you protect strangers because once somebody protected you. His words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. Lena wanted to ask more, but the bell above the cafe door jingled. A familiar voice boomed. Lena, you're open already. It was Mr. Davis, one of the regulars, a retired mailman who always ordered black coffee and toast. She forced a smile. You know me, Davis, got to keep the lights on. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. I heard what happened. Half the town did. Those boys are trouble. Lena, you should close up for a while. I can't, she said simply. If I stop working, I stop feeding my son. Davis sighed. You've got too much pride for your own good woman. Maybe, she replied, turning back to her counter. Jackson, still standing near the door, listened quietly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes said he understood exactly what pride caused. By afternoon, the cafe had settled back into its usual rhythm. Tommy helped serve sodas, giggling when the ice spilled. For a moment, it almost felt normal again until Lena heard the faint rumble of an engine that didn't sound like Jackson's. Her heart skipped. The noise grew louder. 2 motorcycles pulled up outside, but they weren't part of Jackson's crew. Lena froze, her hands tightening around the tray she was holding. Jackson looked up from his seat by the window, his body tensing instantly. The bikes came to a stop and 2 unfamiliar men dismounted. They wore leather too, but their faces were unfamiliar and cold. One of them leaned against his handlebars, shouting through the open door. Hey, sweetheart. You the one the boys were talking about? The entire cafe went silent. Lena's pulse raced. Jackson stood slow and deliberate, his boots echoing against the floor. He walked past her, past the counter, straight toward the door. You boys lost? He asked, his voice calm but heavy. The taller man smirked. Heard there's a little party happening here last night. Thought we'd see if the lady needed company. Jackson stepped closer until he was inches from him. She doesn't? The biker's grin faltered. You got a problem, friend? Jackson's tone didn't rise, but it grew colder. Yeah, men who talk to women like that. Before another word could be said, the other biker nudged his friend. Come on, man. Let's go. They revved their engines and rode off, but not before Jackson's stare followed them like a warning carved in stone. When he turned back, Lena's lips trembled. They'll keep coming, won't they? Maybe, Jackson said, but so will we. Now hold up for a second. Let me ask you something that's been floating in your mind since the story began. What even made you believe bikers are good people? Because let's be honest, most folks see the tattoos, the leather jackets, the noise, and they think trouble. Maybe you still do. But I'll tell you something. Good and bad don't wear uniforms. Sometimes the man in a suit is the villain, and the one on a Harley is the savior. Still don't agree? Let me know in the comment section why you do or don't believe bikers can be good people, and I'll show you exactly why that belief matters before this story ends. All right, let's get back to Lena. Later that evening, the cafe quieted again. Jackson sat across from Lena at one of the booths, sipping black coffee. Tommy had fallen asleep against her arm, holding her apron like a blanket. Lena stared down at her son. He shouldn't have to live like this. Scared all the time. Jackson nodded. He won't, not if I can help it. She hesitated, then asked, Why did you really stop yesterday? You could have ignored him. You don't even know us. Jackson leaned back, his eyes distant. Couple years ago, my sister went missing. Abusive boyfriend. We didn't get there in time. So now whenever I see a woman in trouble, I make sure I get there before it's too late. Lena's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said softly. You just reminded me what family looks like. Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't realized she was holding back. Jackson stood stretching. We'll stay outside tonight again. You get some rest. As he stepped out into the night, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Lena wheeled to the window and watched his silhouette under the cafe lights. Strong, unshaken, a quiet wall between her and everything that wanted to hurt her. And for the first time, she wondered if her faith had been wrong all along, if sometimes angels didn't wear white at all. Outside, lightning flashed briefly, illuminating Jackson's face, hard-watered but calm. Then came the soft whisper of engines revving low, a promise in the darkness. The night may have been quiet, but the war for Lena's peace had only just begun. The next evening began with silence, too much silence. The sun had dipped behind the rooftops, leaving the street bathed in orange and purple. Joe's roadside cafe sat at the corner of the interstate like a wounded soldier, windows repaired, chairs straightened, but the air inside still heavy with memory. Lena Washington moved slowly behind the counter, polishing glasses with trembling hands. Each scrape of cloth against glass carried the echo of what had happened days earlier. The slap, the laughter, the promise of fire. Outside, Jackson Reed and his crew stood like statues beside their bikes. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough to keep most trouble away. But tonight, even Jackson could feel it. Something in the air had shifted. Tommy sat on one of the cafe stools, swinging his legs. Mama, why are the bad men so mean? He asked softly. Lena's eyes softened. Because they've forgotten what it means to be good baby. Then maybe Mr. Jackson should remind them, Tommy said with innocent certainty. Lena smiled faintly, brushing his curls. Maybe he will. Across the street, headlights flickered in the growing dusk. A dark car slowed, paused, then drove off again. Jackson's eyes followed it like a hawk watching movement in tall grass. Bar, he muttered. Keep your eyes on that corner. Bear nodded, tapping his boot against the gravel. Already on it. Inside, Lena tried to calm her nerves by keeping busy, wiping, refilling, rearranging things that were already in place. She told herself she wasn't scared, but fear had a smell, and she could almost taste it in the air. As night fell, the cafe grew quiet. Only one couple remained at a back booth, and Tommy had fallen asleep again, his head resting on his folded arms. Lena dimmed the lights and whispered to herself, One more night, Lord. Just one peaceful night. It began with a sound so faint she thought she imagined it. Glass rattling near the kitchen. Her head jerked up. Jackson, she called softly. No answer. Then came the second sound. Metal scraping metal followed by the hiss of something being poured. Her heart dropped. Gasoline, she whispered. The air shifted, acrid, dangerous. She pushed her wheelchair back and grabbed Tommy from the counter, shaking him awake. Baby, wake up now, Mama, he murmured sleepily. Before she could answer, the back door burst open. Flames leapt up from the alley, licking the edges of the doorway. Someone had thrown a burning bottle. Its glass shattered near the trash bins. Lena screamed, wheeling backward as heat roared in. "Help, Jackson!" Outside, engines roared to life instantly. The bikers had seen the glow before they heard the scream. Jackson sprinted through the front door. Bear right behind him. "Lena!" he shouted. "In the kitchen!" she cried, clutching Tommy. The smoke spread fast, curling across the ceiling. Jackson grabbed a wet cloth and threw it over her lap. "Cover your mouth." "Stay low." Bear kicked over a mop bucket, using the water to smother the spreading fire. Flames hissed, smoke thickened, and the smell of burning oil filled the cafe. In the distance, someone laughed. Jackson looked toward the alley and caught a glimpse of two silhouettes disappearing into the darkness. "They're running," he barked. "Hawk, go!" Engines roared again, tearing into the night after the fleeing shadows. Lena held Tommy tight, rocking him as smoke cleared. "Are you okay, baby?" He coughed but nodded. "I'm okay, Mama." Jackson crouched beside them, chest heaving. "They wanted to scare you?" he said. "Not tonight." Her eyes glistened. "They almost burned my cafe." He met her gaze. "They picked the wrong place." Bear dumped another bucket of water onto the smoldering doorway, then turned toward Jackson. "We got a partial plate number from the car that sped off. We'll find them." Jackson nodded grimly. "Do it before they try this again. But before we go further, let's pause on something you might have believed your whole life. You've probably heard people say, evil always wins because good people do nothing. It's quoted in schools, churches, and even movies. Sounds noble, right? But here's the truth. It's not entirely correct. Evil doesn't win because good people do nothing. Evil wins because good people do too little, too late. Think about it. How many times have we seen someone suffering and said, someone else will help? That was Lena for years. Quiet, patient, surviving instead of fighting. She thought peace meant staying small. But life doesn't reward silence. So don't scroll past stories like hers without feeling something because you might not have been in Lena's cafe last night. But somewhere in your city, another woman is praying for someone like Jackson to walk through her door. By dawn, the fire was out. But the damage was clear. The back wall of the cafe was scorched black. The smell of smoke embedded in every seat. Lena sat outside with Tommy wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wreckage. Jackson returned from the alley, his boots covered in soot. Cops are on their way. Hawk's chasing the other two toward the highway. Lena's voice cracked. This was Elena's dream. I was supposed to protect it. Jackson squatted beside her. And you did. You're still standing, aren't you? She gave a humorless laugh. Standing isn't exactly what I do. He shook his head. No, ma'am. I don't mean your legs. I mean your will. Her eyes softened. You talk like someone who's lost before. Jackson looked away, jaw tightening. I have more than I care to count. The way he said it silenced her. There was pain in that voice, deep and quiet. The kind of pain that makes a man protect others so he never feels helpless again. Police sirens wailed in the distance. When the officers arrived, Jackson gave a statement while Lena held Tommy close. One officer recognized the pattern. Similar attacks on small shops who refuse to pay street fees. Looks like your thugs are part of something bigger, Jackson said. But they picked the wrong woman this time. The officer nodded. We'll need your statements, ma'am. And your manager's contact. Elena Foster, Lena said, exhaustion weighing on every word. She trusted me to keep this place safe. The officer gave a reassuring smile. You've done more than that, ma'am. You survived, and that's what matters tonight. When the last patrol car left, Jackson lingered by the curb, watching smoke curl from the back wall. The neon cafe sign flickered weakly above him, half broken, half lit. Lena wheeled up beside him quietly. You didn't have to stay. He shrugged. Didn't have to, but I wanted to. For a moment, they stood in silence, the soft rumble of engines filling the cool morning air. Lena glanced up at him. Why does it feel like you've been here before? Jackson smiled faintly. Maybe because I have different town, same kind of people. He turned toward her. Get some rest, Lena, you and the boy. We'll take care of the rest. She looked at him. Really looked at the man who had shown up out of nowhere and fought like he'd been waiting his whole life to protect someone again. Jackson, she said softly. I don't know how to thank you. He tipped his head toward the rising sun. You just did. And as dawn broke over the cafe, smoke still hanging like ghosts in the air, one truth settled in Lena's heart. Sometimes hope doesn't come with promises. Sometimes it rides in the dark, chasing the fire away. The morning after the fire smelled like smoke and despair. Charred pieces of cardboard littered the alley behind Roadside Cafe, and the scent of burnt oil clung stubbornly to the air. The fire hadn't destroyed the cafe completely, but it had burned something deeper inside Lena Washington. She sat by the window watching firefighters finish their inspection. Her reflection on the glass looked older, weaker, like the flames had stolen years from her in a single night. Tommy Ramirez sat quietly beside her, tracing circles on the table with his finger. He hadn't said much since the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Mama, are we still going to work today?" Lena gave a weary smile. "This place is our work, baby. We'll fix it." He nodded but didn't look convinced. Outside, Jackson Reed leaned against his motorcycle, speaking to a police officer. His jaw was tight, his tone calm but dangerous. When he noticed Lena watching, he gave a short nod as if to say, "I've got this." He did. At least that's what she wanted to believe. By midday, the small town buzzed with whispers. Some said the fire was accidental. Others swore it was revenge. But Jackson didn't deal in rumors. He dealt in proof. He had been up since dawn, tracing tire marks in the alley and photographing footprints that the police missed. The man didn't talk much, but when he did, it was all purpose. Bear joined him near the dumpster. "Got the plate number Hawk spotted last night," he said, handing over a notepad. Jackson squinted. "Cal plates, probably stolen. But look here. There's a sticker for Derek's Auto Garage. That's Mike's cousin's shop, right?" Bear nodded grimly. "Exactly." Jackson exhaled slowly. "Then we've got a lead." He turned toward the cafe window. Lena was still watching him, eyes full of exhaustion and worry. He raised a hand to reassure her, but inside something heavy settled in his chest. He'd seen too many people like her. Good, quiet souls punished for simply existing where evil thought it ruled. That afternoon, the police returned to take Lena's full statement. She sat near the counter, hands folded tightly in her lap. Jackson and Tommy stood nearby. Officer Patel flipped open his notepad. "Ma'am, we believe last night's fire was deliberate. Your attackers likely wanted to send a message." Lena nodded, her voice trembling. "I've already given them enough, officer. I just want peace." Jackson's tone hardened. "Peace isn't something they give, ma'am. It's something you take back." The officer looked between them, hesitating. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your help, but let's leave the investigation to law enforcement." Jackson's eyes didn't flinch. "With respect, officer, your law shows up after the damage. I'm trying to stop the next one." Patel studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Just don't make things worse." When he left, Lena sighed deeply. "He's right, Jackson. You can't fight everyone." "Then I'll fight the right ones," he said simply. Later that evening, as the town settled into its usual rhythm, Jackson made his move. He rode out toward Derek's Auto Garage, a rundown repair shop at the edge of town. The air there smelled like grease and bad decisions. Inside, 3 men huddled near workbench, their conversation dropping when Jackson's boots hit the floor. Derek looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "You can try," Jackson said, stepping closer. "Heard one of your cars was at the cafe last night." Derek's smirk faltered. "What cafe? The one you tried to burn?" The room went quiet. Jackson's stare was steady. Deadly steady. Bear stood behind him, arms crossed. Derek swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about." Jackson's hand slammed onto the workbench. "You do, and here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell me who paid for it." Derek hesitated. "Look, man, I didn't start nothing. Carlos's cousin. He said there was money in scaring that lady a little. Nobody said nothing about burning the place." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Who's paying him?" Derek looked down, voice barely a whisper. "A man named Victor runs a real estate outfit. Says he wants the whole block cleared out for a new complex. He pays Mike to convince the smaller owners to sell." Jackson's jaw clenched. "So he's buying fear." Derek nodded quickly. "I swear that's all I know." Jackson turned, his voice low. "Then you'd better pray that's true." As he and Bear left, the tension in the garage broke like a snapped chain. Back at the cafe, Lena was sweeping the floor. When Jackson returned, the sight of him walking in, eyes cold and tired, made her stomach twist. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, a man named Victor's pulling the strings. Real estate developer wants this land." Lena's eyes widened. "This cafe belongs to Elena Foster. She'd never sell." "He doesn't need her permission," Jackson said. He just needs you to quit. Lena's voice cracked. He's trying to scare me out. Jackson nodded grimly. And he figured beating you is cheaper than buying you. Lena pressed her hands to her face. Why would someone be so cruel for money? Jackson's tone darkened. Because greed makes good men monsters. She lowered her hands, her eyes glistening. Then what do we do now? He leaned against the counter, voice steady. We gather proof. We expose him. But first we make sure you and Tommy are safe. Outside, the first few stars blinked through the darkening sky. Tommy sat on the steps watching Jackson's crew check the alley. He looked up at Jackson as the biker stepped out. Madam Jackson, are you going to beat the bad guys again? Jackson smiled faintly. Not with my hands this time, kid. With truth. Tommy tilted his head. Truth can fight better than fists ever could, Jackson said. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The cafe lights glowed faintly through her window. She lay awake, listening to the faint hum of motorcycles outside, her unlikely guardians keeping watch. She thought about Jackson's words. Peace isn't something they give. It's something you take back. For years, she had lived quietly, believing silence would keep her safe. But silence had only made her smaller. Now, for the first time, she felt a strange fire in her chest. Not fear, but purpose. She wheeled closer to the window and whispered, Maybe it's time they heard my voice. Outside, Jackson looked up toward her apartment window as if he'd heard her through the night air. He gave a small nod, then turned his gaze back to the street because both of them knew this wasn't over. There were more names in the ledger. And before this was done, Jackson Reed intended to cross out every one of them. By sunrise, the news had spread across town. Joe's roadside cafe attacked again. Reporters showed up at the scene before Lena could even finish sweeping the ashes from the back alley. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved near her face, but Lena said nothing. She didn't know what to say anymore. Jackson Reed stood nearby, arms crossed, his leather vest store with soot. He had been there all night watching, guarding, thinking. The real estate man, Victor Hayes, had finally been named by locals who whispered about shady deals and bribed inspectors. Yet the police still hadn't arrested him. We need more evidence, Officer Patel had said that morning. Without witnesses, it's just hearsay. Jackson didn't believe in hearsay. He believed in action. Inside the cafe, Lena was trying to stay strong for Tommy. Her son sat at the counter eating cereal quietly while she mended a torn apron. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Mama, he said softly. Are we going to move away? She looked at him startled. Why would you ask that? Because bad men keep coming, he said. Maybe if we go somewhere else, they'll forget us. Lena set down the needle and reached for his hand. No, baby, running isn't living. If we keep running, we'll never stop being afraid. He nodded slowly, though he didn't really understand. That afternoon, Jackson walked in with Bear and Hawk, carrying a brown folder thick with papers. We've got something, he said, dropping it on the counter. Lena frowned. What is that? Proof, Jackson replied. Property records, business deals, security footage, everything that ties Victor Hayes to Carlos's crew. Bear smirked. Turns out our boy Victor's been paying them to harass small businesses until they sell. 5 properties on this block already signed over. Lena's eyes widened. So the fire was just to scare me into giving up. Exactly, Jackson said. But now that plan's burned down too. Hawk chuckled low. We can take this to the cops, but it won't stick unless someone's willing to testify. The room went quiet. Lena's stomach tightened. You mean me? Jackson met her eyes. You saw everything. They'll try to twist your story. Maybe even scare you again, but you're the only one who can make this right. For a long moment, Lena said nothing. She looked around the cafe, the pictures on the wall, the counter she'd polished every morning, the smell of coffee and toast that lingered even after the fire. It wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of her husband's dream. She lifted her chin. Then I'll do it. Jackson nodded. That's what I hoped you'd say. The next day, Lena and Jackson met with Officer Patel at the station. The officer looked weary but determined. If you testify, ma'am, we'll move fast. But you need to know this will put you in danger. Lena's voice was steady. I already live in danger, officer. I'd rather live in truth. Jackson's jaw tightened with quiet pride. She's not alone. Patel sighed, closing the file. Court date set for next week. Well, make sure there's protection at the cafe until then. As they walked out, Jackson glanced down at Lena. You're doing something most people would never dare. You sure about this? Lena looked ahead, her wheelchair rolling smoothly over the station floor. I'm done being scared, Jackson. My legs may not carry me, but my voice will. That evening, the cafe filled for the first time since the fire. Friends, neighbors, and regular customers came not for food, but for support. They brought donations, flowers, and quiet promises to stand with her. So Davis, the retired mailman, lifted his cup. This woman right here has got more courage than half this town combined. Cheers and claps followed. Lena blushed. I don't feel brave, she said softly. Jackson, standing at the back, spoke up. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, even when you're scared. Every head turned toward him, his voice carried across the room, firm and deep. You all think good people stay quiet because they don't want trouble. But let me tell you, staying quiet is the trouble. That's how bullies win. That's how men like Victor Hayes keep getting richer while people like Lena lose everything. The room fell silent. Then slowly people began to nod. But before we move on, I want to ask you something that'll make you pause. You've probably been told that forgiveness is strength, right? That to be good, you have to turn the other cheek, walk away, let things go. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Well, here's the truth most people won't tell you. Forgiveness without justice isn't peace. It's surrender. Lena had forgiven people her whole life. The kids who broke her legs, the boss who underpaid her, the thugs who humiliated her. But forgiveness had only kept her quiet, not free. And now she was done forgiving silence. So if you believe real goodness means pretending nothing happened, tell me in the comments why. Because I believe some wrongs deserve a voice before they earn forgiveness. The night before the hearing, Jackson found Lena sitting outside under the neon cafe sign, the soft hum of motorcycles in the background. You should sleep, he said. She smiled faintly. Could you sleep if everything you loved was on trial? He chuckled. Fair point for a while. Neither spoke. The street was quiet except for the distant chirp of crickets. Then Lena asked softly, Jackson, why are you really helping me? He looked away, his expression unreadable. Because once someone stood up for me when no one else would. A woman like you? She didn't make it. But her courage did. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. Your sister? Jackson nodded once. Yeah, I wasn't there in time, but I swore I'd never be too late again. Her throat tightened. Then maybe this isn't just my fight. He met her eyes. It never was. By morning, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters, townsfolk, and a line of roaring motorcycles. Jackson's crew had come to show silent solidarity. Lena took a deep breath, her hands trembling on the wheels of her chair. Tommy held her fingers tightly. You got this, Mama, he whispered. She smiled at him. You make me brave, baby. As she rolled forward, the murmurs of the crowd faded. Cameras flashed. Every click sounded like a heartbeat. Jackson walked beside her, his heavy boots steady on the pavement. Remember, he said quietly, you're not alone in there. She looked up at him. I know. Inside the courtroom, doors opened with a hollow echo. Lena drew a deep breath. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding from pain. She was walking straight into it. And outside, as the engines idled softly and Jackson watched her disappear into the courtroom, he whispered to himself. She finally stood because that's the thing about the quiet ones. When they decide to rise, the world remembers the sound forever. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, old paper, and nerves. Light streamed through high windows, falling across rows of benches filled with towns, folk, journalists, and curious strangers. But in the middle of that tense silence sat Lena Washington, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, her wheelchair gleaming faintly under the white light. She had dressed carefully that morning, pale blue blouse, her cafe apron folded neatly over her knees like armor. Tommy sat behind her with Jackson Reed, who hadn't left her side since the day of the fire. The BA called the room to order, his voice booming. All rise for the Honorable Judge Ellis. Lena's stomach twisted. She'd never been inside a courtroom before. Every creak of the benches, every whisper in the air made her heart pound louder. Across the room, Victor Hayes, the sleek real estate developer who had paid to terrorize her, adjusted his tie. His face was calm, too calm, like a man who bought protection in advance. Beside him sat Carlos and Mike, freshly shaven, wearing suits that didn't hide the thuggishness in their eyes. Jackson leaned close and whispered, Don't look at them. Look at me, she nodded, inhaling shakily. I can do this. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. You already are. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Amanda Clark, opened the case with precision. Your Honor, we will prove that Victor Hayes orchestrated a campaign of threats and violence against Ms. Lena Washington, a disabled worker and mother, in order to force her to surrender her place of employment for his personal gain. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victor's lawyer, a slick man with glasses, rose with a smirk. My client merely pursued business opportunities. There is no proof he condoned violence. Then let's begin with the proof, the prosecutor replied, her tone sharp as a blade. Lena was the first witness. When she wheeled to the front, every sound in the courtroom seemed to fade. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the oath. I swear to tell the truth, she whispered. Amanda smiled gently. Missy Washington, can you tell the court what happened at Joe's Roadside Cafe on the night of August 20th? Lena hesitated, then spoke. 3 men came in after closing. I told them we were out of food. One of them slapped me. My chair tipped. My son was there. Her voice cracked slightly. He ran to get help. And what happened after? She looked toward Jackson briefly. The bikers, Mr. Reed and his men, came to help me. They stopped the attack. The defense attorney stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Sustained, the judge said mildly. Let's stay on what Ms. Washington personally witnessed. Lena's eyes dropped. They threatened to burn the cafe. And later they did. The prosecutor handed her a photo, a charred wall, blackened and crumbling. Is this the scene? Lena nodded silently. When Amanda asked who she believed was behind the attack, Lena's hand trembled slightly as she pointed. Him, she said, her voice firm. Victor Hayes. Victor's smug smile faltered. The defense attorney rose slowly. Miss Washington, you claimed these men came into your cafe to harass you, but isn't it true you gave them free food willingly? I did, she said quietly. Ah, he said, pretending surprise. So they weren't robbing you? They were your customers. Lena's lips pressed together. I gave them food because I was scared. They threatened me every day. The lawyer leaned forward. Or maybe you wanted attention. Sympathy. A way to cover poor management while your boss was gone? Murmurs filled the courtroom. Lena's hands tightened around her armrests, but her voice stayed steady. Sir, I've worked since the day I could move my hands again. I don't want sympathy. I want peace. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. Continue, counselor, but watch your tone. The lawyer stepped back with a forced smile. No further questions. When Lena turned her wheelchair away from the stand, her eyes met Jackson's. He gave her a subtle nod. The kind soldiers give to each other after surviving a battle. Next came the surprise witness, Derek, one of the thugs who'd been part of the gang but had turned himself in days earlier. He looked nervous, chain of guilt heavy around his neck. Mr. Derek, the prosecutor began, did Victor Hayes pay you to threaten Miss Washington? He hesitated, glancing toward Victor. The older man's glare was sharp enough to kill. Yes, Derek said finally, voice shaking. He told us to make her uncomfortable enough to quit. When she didn't, he said, to set a fire. The courtroom exploded in gasps. The judge banged the gavel. The prosecutor's voice rose. So the fire was no accident. No, ma'am. It was a message. When Derek stepped down, Victor's composure cracked for the first time. He whispered something to his lawyer, jaw tight. Outside the courthouse, news cameras waited. Inside, thunder rolled faintly as though the sky itself listened. But before we go further, let's break something most people believe about justice. You've probably been told that the truth always wins in court. It's a comforting thought that if you just tell your story, the system will fix it. But the truth doesn't win because it's right. It wins because someone refuses to let it die. Lena's story wasn't about law or rules. It was about endurance. About a woman who'd been silenced all her life, deciding that this time silence would not protect her. And maybe that's why stories like this one still matter. Because justice doesn't walk into the room by itself. Someone has to drag it in. Now let's get back to that courtroom. The final moments were chaos. The prosecutor submitted bank transfers linking Victor Hayes to Carlos's personal account. The defense lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him down. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, these payments match the timeline of every attack. What's your explanation? Victor stammered. They were maintenance fees, repairs for property. Repairs? The judge interrupted. Your so-called repairs left a woman nearly dead. The silence that followed was thick and unforgiving. When the gavel came down hours later, the decision was clear. The judge's voice echoed across the chamber. Victor Hayes is remanded into custody pending trial for conspiracy, arson, and assault. Carlos and Mike are likewise charged. Murmurs swept through the room like wind and dry grass. Lena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Jackson placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. Jackson shook his head. "No, it's beginning." Outside the courthouse, the storm that had been rumbling finally broke. Rain poured hard, washing the streets clean. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off, but Lena didn't hear any of it. She was too busy breathing, really breathing for the first time in years. Tommy ran to her side, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "You did it, Mama." She smiled through tears. "No, baby, we did it." As Jackson stood in the rain behind them, his leather jacket glistening with water, he looked up at the courthouse steps and muttered almost to himself, "That's what thunder sounds like when justice finally speaks." And somewhere between the raindrops and the flashing lights, Lena Washington, once a broken woman in a wheelchair, realized something profound. She hadn't just won a case. She'd reclaimed her voice. And for the first time, the world had no choice but to listen. The trial had ended, but the echoes of that courtroom thunder still rolled through the town. A week had passed since Victor Hayes, Carlos, and Mike were taken away in handcuffs. Yet the air around Joe's roadside cafe still carried the smell of smoke and memory. But this time it wasn't the smoke of fear. It was the smoke of rebuilding. The morning sun spilled through new windows, gleaming off freshly painted walls. A carpenter worked near the back door, hammering in the final nails where fire once licked the frame. The sound was sharp, but strangely comforting. The sound of something broken being made whole again. Lena Washington sat by the counter, watching it all with quiet disbelief. Every day since the verdict, customers had been showing up with donations, paint cans, even homemade pies. A local news crew had run her story twice. The crippled waitress who fought back. She hadn't wanted the spotlight, but deep down she knew the story wasn't about her. It was about every person who had been pushed down and told to stay there. Tommy Ramirez, her little boy, ran from table to table, helping where he could. "Mama, Mr. Davis," as the new chairs came. Lena laughed, her smile finally real again. "Bring him here, baby. Let's thank him." Tommy darted off, his laughter bouncing against the walls like light itself. Outside, Jackson Reed stood near his motorcycle talking to Officer Patel. "You sure Hayes's men are all accounted for?" Jackson asked. Patel nodded. "The last of them took plea deals. Hayes is facing decades." "You did good, Reed." Jackson shook his head. "Not me, she did." The officer smiled faintly. "Yeah, she surprised a lot of people." Jackson's voice softened. "No." She reminded them when he walked back inside. Lena was arranging napkins by the counter, her wheelchair gleaming in the sunlight. "You should take a break," Jackson said. "The place looks better than new." She smiled. "If I stop moving, I'll start thinking, and I'm not ready for that yet." Jackson chuckled. "Fair enough." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "Letter came in for you from Elena Foster." Lena's breath caught. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. "My dear Lena, I saw the news and cried, you turned pain into power. You didn't just save my cafe. You gave it a new name in this town. When I return, this place won't just be a cafe. It'll be a symbol of courage. I'm proud of you always. With love, Elena." Lena pressed the letter to her chest, tears gathering in her eyes. "She believed in me before I did." Jackson smiled. "Now everyone does." By noon, the cafe buzzed with life again. Locals filled the seats. The smell of coffee and pancakes thick in the air. Laughter replaced the fear that once hung heavy. Tommy passed out menus like a little manager, greeting everyone who walked in. Lena watched him, her heart swelling. "He's not afraid anymore," she said softly. Jackson leaned against the counter. "Neither are you." She looked up at him. "Maybe not, but I still don't understand why you stayed." Jackson shrugged. "Maybe I was waiting for something worth standing for." Their eyes met. Not romantic, but deep and human. Two people who had been broken by the world and still chose to believe in good. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Bear and Hawk dropped by. The roar of their bikes drew curious stares from passers-by. But the townsfolk no longer looked at them with suspicion. In fact, a few waved. "Look at that," Bear said, grinning. "We're respectable citizens now." Hawk chuckled. "Don't let it go to your head." Tommy ran up, grinning wide. "You guys coming to the reopening tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it, kid," Bear said, handing him a shiny biker pin for bravery in the line of duty. Tommy gasped, pinning it proudly to his shirt. "Mama, I'm official now," Lena laughed. "Guess we all are, baby." But while joy returned, some scars remained. That night, when the cafe lights dimmed and the laughter faded, Lena rolled to the back alley. The walls still bore faint burn marks, black streaks like the fingerprints of a ghost. She reached out, touching the wall. For years, she'd lived her life defined by what she'd lost. Her legs, her husband, her peace. But as she sat there now, she realized loss hadn't crippled her. Fear had, and she was done living afraid. Now let me ask you something before we go further. You probably grew up hearing, "Time heals all wounds." It sounds wise, doesn't it? Like healing is automatic. You just wait and pain fades. But here's the truth. Time doesn't heal anything you don't face. If Lena had just waited, if Jackson had walked away, nothing would have changed. Healing doesn't happen with time. It happens with courage. So if you've got a scar you're hiding from, remember this. Healing starts the moment you stop pretending you're okay. Now let's finish this story. The next day, the cafe reopened officially. A new sign hung proudly above the door. Joe and Lena's roadside cafe, where hope is served daily. People gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Jackson and his crew stood nearby, their motorcycles gleaming like silver guards under the sun. Officer Patel shook Lena's hand. "You've done something rare, Miss Washington," he said. "You changed how this town sees people like you, and people like them." He nodded toward the bikers. Lena smiled. Maybe that's the point. People aren't what they look like. They're what they stand for. The crowd clapped. Jackson started the engine on his Harley, revving at once. Not loud, just enough to make the children cheer. Tommy ran up to him. "Where are you going now, Mr. Jackson?" Jackson looked down at him with a faint smile. "There's always another road, kid, but we'll be around." Tommy frowned. "You promise?" Jackson crouched to meet his eyes. "Promise. You just keep helping your mama." "All right, that's your job now." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." As the sun set, Lena stood in the doorway of her cafe, the orange glow reflecting off the new sign. The town that once pied her now admired her. The men who tried to destroy her were gone. Jackson climbed onto his motorcycle, glancing back at her one last time. "You sure you'll be okay?" he asked. Lena smiled, her eyes bright. "I was never this okay before you showed up." He tipped his head, the engine rumbling softly. "Then my job's done." The bikes rolled out slowly, their sound fading into the horizon like distant thunder. Lena turned back to her cafe to her son waiting inside and whispered to herself, "Sometimes strength doesn't come from standing. It comes from never giving up even when you can't." And as she wheeled through the door, the bell above it chimed softly, the sound of new beginnings. Because though the fire had once taken everything from her, the ashes had built something far stronger. Hope. And hope, once it learns to stand, never falls again. The morning breeze drifted softly through the open door of Joe and Lena's roadside cafe, carrying the smell of coffee, cinnamon, and something far more precious. Peace. For the first time in years, the town felt calm. No shouting in the streets, no menacing shadows lurking by the windows, just laughter, chatter, and the comforting hum of a place that had survived the fire. And lived to tell the tale. Inside, Lena Washington moved gracefully in her wheelchair, her movement smooth and confident. Her apron was bright, her eyes steady. The burns on the back wall had been repainted, but she'd insisted on keeping a faint trace of the scorch mark as a reminder. "This cafe nearly died once," she'd said. "Let that wall remind us that some things are worth fighting for." Tommy Ramirez, now 8 and full of restless energy, darted from table to table with menus. His little biker pin of courage still gleamed proudly on his shirt. He called out to the morning crowd, "Welcome to Mama's Cafe, hope you're hungry." The regulars laughed. They adored him and his mother. At one corner booth sat Officer Patel, sipping coffee while reading the local newspaper. The front page headline read, "Justice Served. Victor Hayes sentenced to 25 years in prison." He folded it neatly and smiled as Lena rolled up beside him. "You've changed this town, Miss Washington." She laughed softly. "Me? No, officer." "The town changed itself," he shook his head. "You gave it the push it needed." Lena looked out through the cafe windows where sunlight spilled across the parking lot. "Maybe, but I didn't do it alone." Just then, the faint rumble of motorcycles echoed in the distance. The sound drew eyes from every table. Tommy jumped up on his stool, grinning from ear to ear. They're back. The customers turned as 3 familiar figures rolled into the lot. Jackson Reed, Bear, and Hawk. Their bikes gleamed under the sun like polished armor. Lena's heart lifted. She hadn't seen them in 2 months. Not since the reopening. The bell above the door chimed as Jackson walked in first, carrying the scent of road dust and gasoline. "Well, if it isn't the busiest woman in the county," he said with a half-smile. Lena grinned. "And if it isn't the man who turned my parking lot into a hero's headquarters." Jackson chuckled and glanced around the cafe. "Place looks good. It looks alive," she said. Tommy ran up to Jackson and hugged his leg. "Mr. Jackson, I told everyone about the bikers who saved my mama." Bear ruffled his hair. "You did, huh? Then we're famous now, kid." "Yep," Tommy said proudly. "Everybody knows bikers are the good guys." Lena smiled at that, a deep, warm smile that made the whole room brighter. Later that afternoon, the crowd thinned. The bikers stayed for lunch, talking and laughing with Lena like old family. When Jackson finished his coffee, he leaned forward, his tone quiet. "We're heading east tomorrow. New town, same kind of trouble. But I wanted to see this place again before we left." Lena's expression softened. "You're still chasing storms, huh?" He nodded. "Someone has to." She looked at him for a moment, then said, "You ever get tired of fighting other people's battles?" "Every day," he admitted. "But when I stop, I remember what silence costs. And that's enough to keep me moving." Her eyes glistened. "You saved more than my life, Jackson. You gave me a reason to stop hiding." He smiled faintly. "Nah, ma'am. That strength was always in you. You just needed a reason to use it." As they talked, Tommy sat by the window drawing on napkins. When he was done, he ran over and handed Jackson a small, crumpled sketch. "This is you and Mama," he said proudly. Jackson unfolded it. In the drawing, Lena sat in her wheelchair behind a cafe counter, and Jackson stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Above them, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Real Heroes Ride." Jackson stared at it for a long moment, his throat tightening. He slipped the napkin carefully into his vest pocket. "Thank you, Tommy. That's the best gift I've ever gotten, Quinam." As the day faded into evening, the bikers stepped outside to prepare for their ride. Lena followed them to the doorway, the golden sunset wrapping her in light. The town had gathered again, not because of danger this time, but to say goodbye. People lined the street, waving, thanking the men who had once terrified them, but had now become their protectors. Tommy stood beside his mother, waving so hard his arm achadi. "Come back soon." Jackson started his bike, the engine's growl low and steady. He turned to Lena, eyes warm beneath the shadow of his helmet. "You keep this place safe," he said. "I will," she replied. "And Jackson." She paused, her voice trembling just a little. "Thank you for reminding me that broken things can still protect others." He gave a small nod. "You reminded me they can still heal, too." Then, with a single twist of his wrist, the engines roared to life. The sound filled the air. Not harsh, not wild, but proud. The crowd cheered as the 3 bikers rolled down the street, their leather vests glinting under the fading sun. Tommy ran a few steps after them, shouting, "Bye, Mr. Jackson!" Jackson raised a hand in farewell without turning back, and just like that, they were gone. That night, the cafe was quiet again. Lena sat by the window, the lights dimmed, her thoughts deep. Tommy slept in the corner booth, his small chest rising and falling gently. She pulled out Elena's old ledger from the shelf, the same one she'd once used to track sales. But instead of numbers, she began to write names. People who had helped her rebuild, who had stood beside her, who had refused to let fear win. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one final name, Jackson Reed. Then beneath it, in her neat handwriting, she added a single line. "He rode away, but left hope parked at my door." Before closing for the night, she wheeled herself outside. The street was quiet, moonlight glinting off the cafe sign. A gentle wind rustled through the flags the townsfolk had hung earlier, bright ribbons of blue and gold that fluttered in the night. She looked up, whispered softly, "Thank you, God, for strangers who stayed long enough to become family." And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the distant echo of motorcycle engines. A sound that felt less like noise and more like a promise. You see, people often believe miracles come as lightning, sudden, loud, and divine. But more often they arrive like this. A kind stranger, a helping hand, a quiet act of courage. Lena Washington's miracle didn't fall from the sky. It rode in on 2 wheels, wearing leather and carrying light in its wake. And long after the engines faded, the memory stayed not as a story of pity, but as a story of power. Because the crippled waitress who once bowed her head in fear had finally learned to lift it with pride. If you enjoyed the story, Do check out the next story, because we have prepared a collection of stories that you will find even much more interesting than the one you just watched. Click on the video showing on your screen right now to enjoy. Thank you.